Good morning, BG4, and happy Sunday. I am in the comfort of my own home again. I recorded in my house a couple weeks ago, but it is Saturday morning, and I am editing this video, finishing up actually. But we had a worship night at youth last night, and we came together with 3 different churches and had a night of worship, and it was amazing what God did in my life and I think in some of our students' lives. And really, I think most of all got our students more and more comfortable with the idea of surrendered worship and what that looks like. So I want to encourage you guys to engage in some surrendered worship this morning. As you know, it may be different because it's online and it's a church some of you may not even know, but I encourage you to put some of that aside and just worship and let the Lord speak to you through worship this morning. So with that being said, welcome Stanwood Foursquare Church. Thank you.
Heaven thundered, and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you formed. Faith commanded, and the mountains moved. Fear is losing ground to our hope in you. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. It's impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Freedom conquered, all our chains undone. Sin defeated, Jesus has overcome. Mercy triumphed with the third day dawn. Darkness was denied when the song was gone. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. It's impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. It's impossible things in your name, they shall be done. They shall be done. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. It's impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. It's impossible things in your name, they shall be done. They shall be done. They shall be done. because of what they think you're like. But I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Oh, and I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, because you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Because you are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. And it's a love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. And peace so unexplainable, I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love. Love, love, you're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who you are. Loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Because you are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us.
Welcome back, BG4, and I have a few announcements this morning before we get into our message. Continue our series, Dear God, out of the book of Psalms with Pastor Elizabeth. A few announcements for you this morning. We have a Slowpokes Bible study meeting Wednesday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. They have dinner. If they welcome donations for the cost of food. But if you have any questions about that, I hear it's a really powerful time with the men. If you have any questions about that, please contact Steve Belkoff. We want to connect with you guys as much as we can. If you are new or you just haven't had a chance to connect with us because of this whole pandemic thing, we would encourage you guys to reach out to us, fill out a connect card online or in person, and get connected with us. We would love to spend time with you guys, especially if we don't know you as well as we'd hope to. There are three main ways to give here at BG4. You can give online at bgfour.com/give. You can give by text, and the number will be here up on the screen. And you can give in person in our service at 11 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. At Church of the Holy Spirit. Or the two other ways, you can set up an automatic bill pay, or you can mail your checks or tithe to the P.O. box here on the screen. With that being said, we welcome Pastor Elizabeth, who is continuing our series on Dear God this morning. Thank you so much.
Good morning, BG4. It's great to be back with you. I don't know if you've been here, I've been gone, etc., but I took a few weeks off this summer. Just a time of rest and recovery from some of what this last year has held. And the last week of vacation for me was celebrating my parents' 50th anniversary, and we did that at Glacier National Park. And I'm wondering if any of you have been to Glacier. Absolutely one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been, and we had wonderful experiences both hiking and driving and exploring and being together as a family. But one particular experience sticks out in my mind. It was really the last day of our vacation, and everybody wanted to do something really challenging, really memorable. So we settled on this hike called the Highline Hike. Now, if any of you are familiar with Glacier, Highline is one of the more iconic and famous hikes, and it starts over the Going to the Sun Road, and it's cut into the granite wall. And so people who have fear of heights don't really do necessarily that well, but it is 6 feet wide, and the views are incredible. So we were nervous. I think it is 11 miles long without this additional part that many people do. We took off very early in the morning. You have to get up at like 4:45 to get into the park and get a parking place. At any rate, I think there were 9 of us that were doing this hike, from Noah to all my siblings, Rick, and my sister-in-law. And we got 9 miles into it. Everyone was doing great. And we came to this fork in the road where you can turn and go up the mountain to what's called the Glacial Overlook. It's the top of the Continental Divide. And the guidebook said it's a gorgeous view and a very strenuous hike. But the sign said overlook 0.6 miles. Now, if you knew that you were going to get to see this overlook and it's only a half a mile, well, everyone in our group was like, yeah, I got it, I'm gonna go. We were saying, like, if you don't want to go, you can go wait at the chalet, that kind of thing, but nobody took that option. So we began up this incline. And it was steep, and you have to recognize that we were going from 7,000 to 8,000 feet, so the altitude played into it too. Had this backpack, and pretty soon I was panting, and I was a little shocked, like, I'm not running, and yet I'm breathing like I'm running. So we continued up, and then there was another factor. Every time you kicked, there was lots of like shale and broken rock, and every time you kicked some, it would fall like 1,000 feet down. And my son Noah, every few steps, was throwing rocks till finally we were like, we can't take it anymore, stop. And several in the group started to have a little problem with heights. When we passed another group, we'd have to kind of hold onto the rock and try not to look backwards and look down the side. And then there were parts where there was water coming out of the rock. And one of my life philosophies is never trust a wet rock, right? I'd just be concerned about slipping. And I didn't have any actual hiking boots. That's a bad decision. And they talked about there being issues with heights at the first part of the hike, but nobody mentioned this, but this was actually far worse. My poor sister-in-law actually had a full-blown panic attack, and my brother was incredible in supporting her and helping her to get through that. But the heights issue was quite serious. And as we were getting higher and working so hard and battling anxiety, it didn't seem like the view was really changing. It was the exact same view, just from a little higher up. And I started to think this was not a great decision. My kids were bounding ahead of me, and I recognize I'm 43 years old. I'm barely making it through. I'm slogging along thinking, I just am seeing the same view from a little higher up. And we were almost to the top, and I still felt the same way. And then in a moment, we stepped up to the Continental Divide high enough to see over the other side. And this view opened up before me that was absolutely unlike anything that I'd ever seen. I was looking down at the huge Grinnell Glacier, just spectacular. And beyond that, there's this blue alpine lake with other glaciers like ice cubes floating in it. There were like mountain goats, and the whole thing was framed by jutting rock that just was so dramatic in the way that it framed this gorgeous picture. I'd really never seen a view like it. I've never seen a view where I was looking down on glaciers. And suddenly all the pain of the hike just kind of began to fade. I looked back on it fondly. We'd gotten to the end of our journey and we could see the view. And the only thing I had left to worry about was making sure that my boys didn't, topple off the edge because they exhibited no fear. The perspective changed completely once I was looking from the top of the mountain. And reflecting on that hike had me kind of thinking about life right now, because I came home, came off vacation, and I'm facing challenges I didn't expect to be facing. All of us got faced with another mask mandate. And no matter how you feel about that, I think everyone feels tired. When you think you're done, and then someone tells you you've got a whole nother steep half-mile to go, it's challenging. You don't know if you can do it. You don't know what's going to be on the other side. Many of us have faced other challenges this year. Things that make us sometimes feel like we might want to give up on community or pushing forward in our relationship with Jesus. And in the middle of that, we need encouragement. We need perspective. We need God to strengthen our resolve and help us to see from a different viewpoint, not just be right in the middle of that uphill climb. I'm wondering if any of you are also facing an uphill climb, if any of you feel exhausted when we look at going back to school, facing some of the same restrictions that we did in years past. Well, today we're going to talk about Psalm 27. Psalm 27 has always been one of my favorite passages of Scripture, and we're continuing our Dear God series where we are learning how to pray from the Psalms. And Psalm 27 teaches us to pray, Dear God, I need your presence, because God's presence gives us strength and it gives us perspective. And sometimes we think we need all sorts of things, but what we actually need is to be with God. So wherever you are in your uphill climb, I hope that Psalm 27 will speak encouragement to you today. The Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger, so why should I tremble? When evil people come to devour me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will not be afraid. Even if I'm attacked, I will remain confident. The one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections, meditating in his temple. For he will conceal me there when trouble comes. He will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock. Then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. At his sanctuary I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy, singing and praising the Lord with music. Hear me as I pray, O Lord. Be merciful and answer me. My heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. And my heart responds, Lord, I am coming. Do not turn your back on me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You have always been my helper. Do not leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God of my salvation. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the right path, for my enemies are waiting for me. Don't let me fall into their hands, for they accuse me of things I've never done. With every breath, they threaten me with violence. Yet I am confident I will see the Lord's goodness while I am here in the land of the living. Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. Amen. David already spoke lots of encouragement into our hearts this morning. Well, let's break down what Psalm 27 has to say to us about how we can pray in the middle of overwhelming life circumstance. And that's the first point. Life gets overwhelming. David had firsthand experience about everything going wrong at the same time. Many of us have had really difficult years. David writes this psalm out of this kind of experience. He worked for Saul, King Saul, the first king of Israel. He was his right-hand man, and he did everything right and loyally, but he did it really well. And there began to be this jealousy and insecurity that formed in Saul. And some of us have had the experience of being treated really unfairly and contemptuously at work. And David had even more than that, because Saul used the power of his office, that he was head of the Israeli army, and he began to seek David, who now was hiding from him because Saul intended to kill him. He was usurping the power of his position to turn it against a loyal servant, David, who'd done nothing to deserve it. And he was determined to kill him just because of threat and jealousy. So for most of us, the pictures that David paints, that he's surrounded, first he describes them like they're angry animals, and then he says surrounded by an army. And I think there are times when we have all felt that way, but David actually had the experience of having an army coming after him personally, which is unusual. Still, David starts with God. That first verse, the Lord is my light and my salvation. So first metaphor is light, because God brings perspective. When we're in the middle of suffering and adversity, it's easy to just begin to not be able to see any meaning or be able to see that you're making any progress in your journey. Everything feels confusing and dark. And into the midst of that, David reminds us that God is light. He's the very thing that allows us to see where we're going and where we've been. Secondly, he says, he's my stronghold. A stronghold would be like a high place that you could see from and you could defend. And so now David's using his imagination and using these visual images to say that God is like this stronghold that you can defend. You can actually see what's going on rather than being right in the middle of the battle. And perhaps you can rest because you can feel safe and secure in such a stronghold. And David's saying, God, you are a stronghold. And coming to you in prayer and worship is like entering into this place with God. But David still faces real problems. He faces the existence of an enemy. 1 Samuel describes how Saul, when in his anger and insecurity, which was a natural thing, his emotions weren't very mature, but then something else happened. It said an evil spirit came upon him and empowered those emotions, and now he was dead set, irrationally set on killing David. And the Bible's really honest about the existence of evil and the existence of Satan, whose name means the accuser, and his work is to try to take people out as they follow God. He opposes God's will in David's life and in your life. Jesus said he was a murderer from the beginning, and so his goal is always to take us out and stop us from following Jesus, from sticking to community, and from growing in our purpose in life. And we really do face enemies. It's not a word we use very often unless we're talking about a war. And the truth is, we do face warfare. We don't want to call anything and everything spiritual warfare, but there are times when we face a full-blown attack of the enemy. And how do you discern? Because we don't want to call everything an attack of the enemy. Sometimes we just need to grow up and we're in conflict with people because we're immature and we need to gain relational skills. We need to deal with our own emotional health. But there are times, and we want to be honest about that because the Bible is, when there is another level that we are dealing with, there's this full-blown accusation and attack. And the way I think you discern when something is from the enemy is, first of all, it is intense. One thing happens and then another thing happens and another thing piles onto that. And then you begin to sense this accusation that you need to just stop what you're doing, stop pressing into Jesus, stop staying connected to community. And you realize in that moment that that's when you are facing an attack of the enemy. Well, many of you know that this year has just in general been a really difficult year for most of us, first of all, but definitely in the Sawchuk home, because there's been all the things of 2020, 2021, and then we faced a medical crisis, and we've been dealing with all the ramifications of that in the last year. And when you're facing difficult things, sometimes when something else happens, it just feels like that could be the straw that breaks the back. Do you know what I'm talking about? Well, I faced another challenge in the last few months. There was a relational challenge with a friend of mine that I love very much. There was, first of all, a misunderstanding, and I'm sure that I added to that. And then I think there were things going on in that person's life, and it has led to a bit of a relational break. And I know that I didn't want there to be a break there. And I'm kind of waiting in the confusing in-between. But in the middle of that, I experienced what ended up being a full-blown attack of the enemy. Because there was this natural layer of conflict, and that happens in life. And then there was another layer where I was hearing accusations because this friend said that things had been very difficult in my life, and she didn't know how to walk with me through it. I began to think, you're going to be alone and you're not going to make it through this difficult chapter in your life. And that was the voice of the enemy. But it took me a little while to discern it. So today, I want us to think about discerning when we are being attacked by the enemy, when we're not just facing natural challenges, because Psalm 27 is written about facing attack. And when you begin to hear accusation in your soul, you can recognize the voice of the accuser and know that you are facing the enemy. So once we recognize that we might be surrounded by the enemy, what does God have to say? Well, David tells us that one thing is needed. And man, that challenges all of my natural responses. Because when I am facing attack on a natural level or on a supernatural level, I'm going to have to set aside other desires. What are the natural desires when you feel attacked? Personally, defending myself, being vindicated. I have this, I don't know if anyone else but me is this immature, but I have this defense attorney in my head. And this defense attorney, if I'm facing this kind of attack, will just be talking about why I'm right and kind of imagining the other person admitting that I'm right and they're wrong and how beautiful that's going to be. And that can take up a lot of headspace and emotion. There might also be even a desire for revenge. You've been hurt. You want the other person to know what that feels like. But David says, even in the midst of being attacked by someone who should have protected him, he says one thing is needed. One thing. And that's to be in the presence of God. Our greatest need is to be in God's presence, and we're going to have to let go of all those lesser needs of being vindicated. He sets aside all the voices, all the feelings, all the desires. My brain's noisy when I'm facing unfair accusation, when I'm panicked, when things are happening one after another in my life. But David, again, uses his imagination to enter into this amazing place of perspective and prayer. He says that God is his house. The New Living translates it sanctuary, but the literal word is tent. Then he also says that God is a high rock. And finally, the word is for temple or palace. He describes God as a place in all those ways. And it's a descriptive place. God is this house, this palace. It's on a high rock. It's a tent of shelter. And David wants to be in the place where God is. Shortly after this relational break that was painful in my life, I had the opportunity to go away by myself to the beach for like 24 hours. Incredible gift. And I was dragging my heels. I did feel like it was something God wanted me to do. But as I was getting ready to leave, my kids needed things. I even felt like my dog didn't want me to go. And I had that anxiety that some of you might be familiar with. If I step out, is everybody going to be okay? Without me holding all this together, will life keep going? But I did. I pushed through. And I went to this prayer cabin at Twin Rocks, which is available to anybody, by the way. And I got there and I kind of didn't know what am I going to do with myself with no screens? I didn't let myself take books besides like one that was about what I was praying about. And without any kids to take care of, what am I going to do with myself? And sure enough, in the first little while, what came to mind in the quiet was the conflict that I was facing and how was I going to deal with that? But something happens in quiet. It's kind of like shaking an hourglass or one of those snow globes. Eventually, all of it settles to the bottom and your soul begins to experience quiet. And it's just kind of like a law of gravity. And so it was that evening, I sat looking at the most gorgeous sunset, and it was kind of awkward because it was just me, not something I'd really done before. And I was sitting in one chair, but there was a second chair. And I'd run out of words. The quiet had fallen. And suddenly I just had the strongest sense that Jesus was sitting in that other chair, that he would even reach out and take my hand. And that words were absolutely unnecessary, but I was so seen and known and loved. And even when I left that little cabin, that experience in that picture, it was so much inside of me that it felt like some place I could return to in my imagination. David's been to high rocks. He's been in tents. He's worshiped in God's house. And he's able to carry those pictures with him when he's hiding from the enemy. And he can go there in prayer. I think sometimes we're afraid to use our imaginations in prayer. We don't want to be new agey or anything like that. But this far predates our current New Age movement. And God made our imaginations. And an incredible prayer adventure is to use your imagination to go to a place that's just for you and God. And we see David modeling that in our psalm today. And once you're there in your place with God, either literally or just going there in your imagination, you have one job. And that's to delight and to meditate. You don't have to worry about all the things in your life. You're being there with God. And delighting and meditating are kind of two sides of the same coin. But I look at it like this. Delighting looks backwards, not in a bad way, in a reflective way. And meditating or inquiring, some translations say, look forward. Let me explain. Delighting in the Lord is to remember all the ways that God has come through for you in difficult situations in the past, what he's done for you in salvation, the moments that he's met you when hope ran out, the ways that he's shown you that he was a father and someone that loves you, and taking time to remember all the goodness of God, to look back. That's what it means to delight, and it begins to change us. And then meditating or inquiring, it's looking forward. So then we are recognizing that everything, all the wisdom that we need for difficult situations, it's all found in the Lord. All the riches of wisdom and knowledge are found in Christ is the way that Paul puts it in Colossians. And that's the moment when we stop just trying to look at prayer as getting something from God, even if that something is answers. And instead of wanting God to do something for us, we just want God. And all the other desires begin to fall away. And we realize that when we are with God, that the other things, we begin to have wisdom and perspective about them. But our true desire is to know Him better, to meditate on who He is. So then, from that perspective of being with God, we can ask the final question: who has my back? David talks about that invitation that God gives to come and talk with Him. And he says, Lord, I am coming. And then from that place, he talks about some disappointments that he's experienced. He says, even if my mother and father forsake me, and I can't help but wondering what's behind that, because David was running away from the most powerful person in the country, and I'm guessing that may have created distance from him from his family. Sometimes when the chips are down, people don't stick up for us the way that we would hope. Maybe you've experienced that. Things are challenging in your life, and the people that you expect to be there for you just don't have the capacity to be there for you. They don't have maybe the time. They don't have the emotional stamina. They're not able to be there for you at every moment of your need. And I think that's a reality of every relationship. It has its limits. It's the reality of every relationship except for our relationship with God. Because we get to figure out that God has our back. That even if we experience rejection from those closest to us, or maybe not rejection, just disappointment, the relationship has its limits and they can't go there with us, still, we discover that God has our back. I have this way of dealing with challenges that I think some of you might relate to. There are different ways of dealing with it. Some of us like to entertain ourselves or kind of numb out. Some of us get a little bit tough and strong and you're not going to show anything. And my personal favorite way that's not real healthy of dealing with challenges is to try to keep control of everything and stay busy. Then I won't feel as much, and I hope that I can protect everyone and everything around me from experiencing pain. I get going so quickly trying to protect my kids, my husband, people that I love. And recently, a good friend of mine said to me, as we were kind of talking about my tendency to try to protect everyone around me, and this person said to me, "How's that working out for you?" And I recognize that despite all this work, I'm really not able to protect my family, my dear people in my life from experiencing pain. She said, "What would it look like if you trust God to have your back, since this other way of dealing with it is not working out for you?" And of course, I've never been sure, because God doesn't seem to always protect us from pain, that I could trust Him with those that I love. But I recognize I really don't have a good alternative. But trusting that God will meet us in the midst of every difficult thing we face, trusting that He will be there even when other relationships face their limits. That's when we discover that God has our back. And then we gain perspective. Psalm 27 ends with really a mountaintop view, and I want you to picture standing in a place like the Continental Divide and looking down. Because David says this, "I am confident that I will see the Lord's goodness while I am here in the land of the living." Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. David has given us graphic descriptions of the adversity that were like wild beasts, that were like an army that he's facing. And he comes back to where he started in his poem, in his worship song. I may not be able to see everything that's going on because I'm in the middle of a really difficult uphill climb, and I don't have perspective right now, but there will be a day when I am going to see clearly, like God sees clearly. I'm going to be standing on the top of the mountain and I'm going to be looking back. Prayer and worship allow us to see things from God's perspective, even when we're still in the midst of the climb, in the midst of the fight. We get this mountaintop perspective because we stand with God and see things from His perspective. Have you experienced that before? Two last things. We can't avoid waiting. So the Bible word for waiting that's found in this scripture really means to bind or tie together. It's used to weave a rope. It's used to tie something to something else. And so waiting is waiting in hope by tying yourself to God. It really is a word that would describe what it means when a mountain climber attaches a belay, attaches a rope. Because once you are tied and you are secured in your climb, it does not matter how much you slip and slide. It doesn't matter if you're scared, even if you're having a panic attack. What matters is that you are tied to someone who is stronger than you are, and you are going to make it. I'm going to say that one more time. You are tied to someone who is stronger than you are, and you are going to make it through this climb. Secondly, after we recognize that we can't avoid waiting, we also recognize that we are going to see God's goodness. I love the phrase, I'm going to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And what that tells me is I don't know all the ins and outs, but there will be a day when I'm going to stand on that mountain and I'm going to look back at my journey and it's going to make a whole lot more sense. And what I'm going to see for sure is the way that the goodness of God chased me through it all, that He provided and He fulfilled His promises and He got me through when my feet were slipping. And I'm going to stand with Him and we're going to talk about everything that He brought us through. And that's what it means to stand on the top of the mountain with God. That's what it means to enter into that place of prayer where we have perspective. Recently, my friend Tom Burns shared with me the story of praying for his dad for 40 years to come to Christ. And that really doesn't tell the whole story because there were so many disappointments and difficulties and refusals to listen. And Tom felt like he was beating his head against a wall. And then just 2 weeks ago, he wrote a letter to his dad because his dad can't really argue with a letter. And what happened? His dad showed the letter to a chaplain, and the chaplain led his dad in a prayer to receive Christ. And Tom's dad called him 40 years after Tom began to pray and said, I've given my life to Christ. I'm going to be with you and with your mom in heaven. And Tom looked back and suddenly the journey seemed a whole lot shorter because here he was standing on the mountain looking back at the goodness of God. And so as we pray in this last moment, I want you to think about a place where you've met God. It might be holding a fishing pole or a place you go hunting, standing on a porch looking at a sunset, toes in the ocean. There's going to be a different place for every person. I want you to practice something that might be a little bit uncomfortable as we close our eyes. I want you to picture that place just like David pictures a place he goes with God. And then I want you to practice listening for what God would say to you from that place of perspective and safety. So God, I pray for everyone who's listening to me. I pray that they would find a place where they can be at rest and where they have perspective because they are in your presence. Would you meet us and speak to us? And I just encourage you to take a few moments as we're ending, to be with God and to listen to God and to look for His goodness and meditate on who He is. Thanks for joining us.